Welcome to the Nerd Review. This is the show where we talk about movies, TV shows, video games, books, and comic books. Today you're listening to episode 15, and we're talking about The Mask, the movie, and the comic book. The movie from 1994, starring Jim Carrey and Cameron Diaz, which hugely popularized the series that is actually based off of a comic book published by Dark Horse Comics that ran from 1991 to 1995. We're going to talk about the movie, and we're going to do a bit of a compare and contrast to the comic book and the source material, and we're going to talk about all the fun trivia and behind the scenes, critical reception, and all the nerd stuff that we talk about here at the Nerd Review. So let's jump into that now. Now let's start with the movie that was so popular in 1994. The movie was brimming with potential and talent, starting with the director, Chuck Russell. He had just finished, filming movies such as A Nightmare on Elm Street 3. He had done the remake, the 80s remake of The Blob, two really great horror movies that use practical effects and special effects and blended them in, such amazing ways. Both those movies are considered, great to this day because of those, what I'm always talking about, that blend of CGI and practical effects. So he was a great choice for the adaptation of The Mask. And, they really utilized that same wheelhouse of, putting on the prosthetics and using CGI to enhance those scenes. So a really great blend of those two mediums, practical effects and CGI. As I'm always lavishing about, those are some of my favorite things to see in movies. And a lot of the times you see it in horror movies the most. Like, those are two horror movies that he had previously directed, and now The Mask is more of a PG-13 movie, though in Quebec it's actually rated G, which I'll get back to at some point, because I upon rewatching The Mask, I don't think it was a G movie. I constantly am watching this and just thinking, like, this was for kids? This was rated for kids? Only in Quebec. The movie is PG-13, and in some places just like 14 plus. You have to be over the age of 14 to see it outside of Quebec, which is just one of those little interesting things I think about, and that always comes up when researching a film. Having grown up in Quebec, there are some movies that I saw at a very young age, and upon revisiting them, like The Mask, or a great example that comes to mind is Harold and Kumar, to go on a little bit of a ratings tangent here. Both the original Harold and Kumar and the sequel, Harold and Kumar Escape from Guantanamo Bay, they're both rated PG-13 in Quebec. And to put that in perspective, The Mask has some questionable scenes, for sure, and we'll get to that. But for this example, in Harold and Kumar Escape from Guantanamo Bay specifically, because I saw this in theaters and I was 14, my older brother was 15, and my stepbrother was 13, so just above the age where we didn't need anybody to come with us. And there is full frontal male nudity. If you've seen Harold and Kumar Escape from Guantanamo Bay, the Guantanamo Bay portion includes the explanation and on what a cock meat sandwich is. This episode just went NSFW in, like, this escalated very quickly. This is a random tangent. So it was just, it's it was PG-13 here. It's rated R, like a hard R in the States, because full frontal nudity, grotesque, not grotesque, but gratuitous language, drug reference, all of these things that earn it, a rated R rating outside of Quebec, and even outside of inside of Canada, not just in the United States. And it's always something that I look back on and think, like, wow, we really we don't evaluate movies in the same strict manner. And I've always found that interesting, and it leads to some funny stories when you think back about it, being 13 or 14, I was, probably saying some things and referencing some things that were a bit above my head. Being a bit older now and having hindsight, it's funny situations like that. So I'll end this tangent. Let's get back to the movie. The Mask is rated PG-13 outside of Quebec, rated G in Quebec, which is, like I said, hilarious. So it stars Jim Carrey, Cameron Diaz. Cameron Diaz plays Tina, and like I said, it was also a comic book. And in the comic book, Tina doesn't exist, actually. Stanley Ipkiss, the character that Jim Carrey plays, his girlfriend is Kathy, who doesn't make an appearance in the movie. So which are things I just find, interesting. Why did they have to create a new name for Cameron Diaz? They could have simply called her Kathy, and that would have been more accurate to the source material. Maybe Kathy wasn't a very popular name at the time, and Tina sounded better. These are the questions that I have written down. Why? Like right next to Cameron Diaz, I wrote down, why did they change her name from Kathy? So we'll talk about the movie plot a bit. So the movie follows loosely the first comic books. So it does follow Stanley Ipkiss and him finding the mask, and in the comic book, when you put on the mask, you become the persona Big Head. So the mask has its own persona, and it's at times it's shown like it's talking even when it's not on somebody's head. And the idea in the comic book is that when you wear it, it enhances your personality, which they do talk about in the movie. That's something that Stanley says as he's explaining it to Tina, to Cameron Diaz, towards the end of the movie, right before the big final act. He says, in his words, it enhances who you are. And Stanley Ipkiss in the movie, he's a bit different in the comic book. So Stanley Ipkiss in the movie, he's defined as being a hopeless romantic and trapped in his own cowardice or something, and within he wants to be this love crazed unstoppable hero, and that's what the mask enhances in his character, in his movie character. In the comic book, Stanley Ipkiss becomes obsessed with power. He creates a hit list and goes after everybody who's ever wronged him, which they adapt into the movie fairly well in some manners. So the garage guys, the mechanics who are ripping him off, were adapted pretty well. And in the movie, when again I find it hard to believe that this was rated G, but in the movie, when they cut to the garage, which is what connects Stanley Ipkiss to the mask in the first place, because his car is at the garage, they wheel out the mechanic, and he has a muffler sticking up out of his ass, and the police chief guy is like, I need the best proctologist you've got. And you watch that scene, you just think like that a group of individuals had to sit down and watch this and review it and make a decision that, yeah, that seems appropriate for general audiences. That's totally fine for kids to watch. That gentleman was assaulted and has a muffler sticking out of his ass. Slap a G rating on it, send it to theaters, advertise it as a comedy for the whole family. It's just a weird thought. It's a weird thing to think after watching a movie like The Mask. And I mean, you stand out, and I'm going back on this tangent again. So let's push forward. So the garage scene, that's what brings in the police, and they're alerted to this spree of crimes that happens after Stanley finds the mask. And so it introduces Lieutenant Calloway in the movie. He's played by Peter Rigert. I'm not good with last names. I apologize to this gentleman. So Lieutenant Calloway in the movie. So in the comic book, so another slight change if we're doing a compare and contrast. In the comic book, Stanley lives in the same apartment as Lieutenant Calloway's mother. She's his landlady, who's replaced by Mrs. Peeman, played by Nancy Fish. So that's a slight change. In the comic book, that's why Lieutenant Calloway picks up the crimes, because they're called to the apartment after the first incident when he smashes up the place, and they're called there for the first time. So in the movie, it's the garage that is what initiates the whole crime spree, the cops. That's where we pick up from the cops' perspective. And in the comic book, actually too. So it's interesting that the mask would actually fall into Calloway's hands at some point. But I'll get to that at the end of the movie comparison. So in the movie, after the garage, they start investigating, and Stanley Ipkiss's car is at the garage, which is where the news lady gets involved. Peggy, she gets involved, and they track down Stanley Ipkiss, and they have to interview him. And then the robbery happens at the bank shortly thereafter. And the movie, so none of that actually happens in the comic book if we're doing a compare and contrast. So, it was adapted, right? It's a loose adaptation. The bank doesn't exist. I believe Stanley works at the bank, but it's not like the biggest plot point. He's just happens to be an accountant. And his friend Charlie, he's not a character in the movie. They change some of the police people. There's no Doyle. It's Lionel. Instead of Doyle, it's Lionel. And there was a few changes like that, but they did do a lot of good the mask scenes. So from the first comic books, probably one of the scenes that everybody remembers, or if you've seen the movie, one of the really great scenes is when he does the balloon animal work, and at one point he goes to pull out the balloon and it's a condom. Then he does the giraffe, and then he does the poodle, and then he's like, now for my favorite, and he changes it, and it's like my Tommy gun. That was very well done. That was seen. That was a panel by panel translation adaptation into the movie, which I think was phenomenally done. But as I said, interestingly enough, in the movie, it's Jim Carrey that does all of that stuff, but in the comic book, it's actually Lieutenant Calloway. So it would have been Peter Rider's character that does that, makes the Tommy gun. So it's interesting how they take elements from the story, because they were telling Stanley, they wanted to tell the story of Stanley Ipkiss, the original first character to put on the mask, but then they take elements from later on other characters that would wear the mask. So it would be like, you have different iterations of Spider-Man or Batman, kind of the same thing, but then to take from the comic book and blend it into one character did all of those things. That's kind of what they did here. And that was again, they added in Dorian's character from where I am in the comic book. So you take everything at face value too. I want to be honest, I haven't finished the comic books. There's a lot of content on the comic book. So the original series runs from 1991 to 1995, like I said earlier. But since then, it's been expanded into other series. I mentioned there was a crossover with DC and Marvel. On the Marvel side, it was a Lobo. It was Lobo versus the Mask. And to be honest, I'm not familiar with Lobo. I don't know that one. So I did pick up a digital version of the DC crossover with Dark Horse. They did Joker Mask, and the premise for that one's really interesting. It's the Joker is robbing a museum, and the Mask happens to be there, and then him and Big Head happen to attack. They team up. He happens to find the Mask, and they team up against Batman. And so from what I know, Dorian and Tina, they don't exist in the original comic books. Though, interestingly enough, I find this very, coming back around full circle. The comic book is adapted into a screenplay, which is made into the movie, and then the screenplay was given back to the comic book developers, and then they developed it into a comic book that follows the script from the movie, and they would actually use the likenesses of Jim Carrey and Cameron Diaz and all of these other actors to draw the comic book characters this time for this iteration, and it's just called The Mask, like the movie adaptation, and that's an interesting comic book too. They add a few more spins, and they can do a bit more with the mask and all of his mannerisms and stuff, which is interesting. I just find that it comes full circle. So it starts as a comic book and it's adapted, and then it's adapted back into a comic book, which is funny. It goes full circle, and they can they sell more entertainment to us, and we buy it up, and it's always good fun. So the movie continues after how far did we get? We got to the part where they're at the mechanics and the police are involved, and then that brings me to the crack police work that they wrote into the movie. Calloway's police work, he identifies Ipkiss as a person of interest because his car was at the mechanics, and then the bank where he works is robbed. And he finds so then the third one was he finds a piece of his pajamas at the Coco Bongo Club after the shootout with Dorian's gang members. And so he is tied to all three, sure. He didn't really put much effort into the fact that technically Tina would be connected to 2 out of 3 locations, and there was other people there too. But the second one, he tells him that he's gonna find his fingerprints at the bank, and that would prove to everybody that Ipkiss was the guy. So his big crack in the case was that they were going to find Stanley Ipkiss's fingerprints where he worked, and that was going to solve the case. Like, oh, his fingerprints were found at his place of employment. Shocking revelation. Oh, and the other one was that nobody else would be stupid enough to buy pajamas like he had, because he had that piece of his pajamas, and he's like, nobody else is gonna buy pajamas this stupid. So like that was your two like concrete evidence of police work. That one, you are absolutely certain that nobody else in the world bought those pajamas, and 2, his fingerprints were found at the place that he works. I don't see it's just terrible police work, but it's a movie and it has to progress the plot along, but they lose a little bit there. They could have had something else, blood, spit, something. He was getting shot at, and if he could leave a piece of his clothing behind, he could leave something else that's more than that's more than just a piece of his pajamas that this one police officer, Lieutenant Calloway, that he's convinced that nobody else could have bought. And I found that freaking hilarious in the context of what they had written for the screenplay. So before that moves on, let's talk about for a second that whole scene that goes down after the bank robbery, and the mask beats Dorian's crew to robbing the bank. That's the whole reason that Tina's character is there. She has the purse with the camera in it, and she was just recording the safe, and they were planning to do a heist because Dorian he wants to take over the city and this crime syndicate that employs just henchmen with terrible hairstyles. It's the 90s, and I guess they're on a tight budget, so you just had like long and straggly, and then varying degrees of baldness and ponytail. I don't know. I don't understand what was going on here. You had slick back hair with a ponytail, and then you had balding, like the horseshoe balding with a ponytail, and then the worst one was completely shaved head with a ponytail, which just really emphasizes the tail part of this. It looked like it was just like right on the back of his head, and he had this long braided ponytail, which was just like all the henchmen. You know, the only person that had regular hair was Dorian's character, which I find weird. I don't know why the henchmen had these ponytails. It was very strange. And it's just that it was a random tangent. So the Mask, you know, he beats him to this. You know, he wants to have all this money, and so he robs the bank, the place where he worked, where Stanley Ipkiss works, and then he goes to the Coco Bongo Club, and there's the dance sequence with Cameron Diaz, and her singing is actually dubbed by Susan Boyd. That was the voice of Susan Boyd, and so they have that whole dance scene where they do amazing for, you know, it's 1994 and there's amazing VFX, and it's, you know, one of the interesting trivia facts is that Jim Carrey's face, and, you know, sorry, Jim Carrey's face, that's one of the trivia facts, is that Jim Carrey's face, is that the exaggerated faces that he's able to do and the way he was able to move his body on camera actually allowed them to reduce how many special effects needed to be done, because he was able to make these exaggerated cartoonish faces, which, I mean, you know, if you've seen a Jim Carrey movie, you've seen him do these faces before, so that's interesting. They were able to, you know, his face is so animated and he's able to do these facial you know, comedy, you know, comedic gestures with his face muscles, facial musculature, if we want to be super specific. So that was interesting. You know, they were able to like actually save money because he's so talented and has such a degree of control over all those, you know, muscles in his face. And so you know, that scene, you know, his head turns into a dog, and, you know, his heart's pumping out of his chest. That was all done by ILM, Industrial Light and Magic. They're the VFX company that did all the layering for the Mask, and they took all of the scenes, and, you know, they have the green mask is a real prosthetic that you know, took about 4 hours to do in the makeup trailer, and then they would add you know, special effects, you know, the eyes popping out of his head and his tongue popping out in the first sequence with the landlady, you know, him turning into like a bowling pin and popping out all around the room and stuff. All of this was very well done and very cutting edge for 1994, and it holds up really well. I've watched the movie a few times this week. I've watched the movie today. You know, I'll be honest, I have it playing over on my side here, and, you know, it's good for pacing, helps you follow along, and the VFX really hold up. They're really well done. And, you know, the movie came out in 1994. It's almost almost 30 years from now, 30 years ago. It's 2024, in less than a year and 4 weeks. It's crazy. And the movie really holds up. It's really good. You know, really good blend of practical and VFX. So that whole scene is probably that scene is probably. Well, let's just past that one. It's probably one of the best portions of the movie. There's so much going on, so many costume changes, so many references, and you know, it leads to the first confrontation between Dorian and his varying degrees of baldness and ponytailed bad guys. And there's so many things that I love about that scene. One of the best ones is towards the end when he's, you know, coughing, and, you know, he's been shot and he's being held in the arms by the balded ponytailed gentleman, and, you know, they seem to be like truly affected by his death. They're crying and there's tears in their eyes, and to me that's the effect, the magic of the Mask is pulling them into like his like little reality or whatever he's enacting, and that's even, you know, enforced, I guess, not enforced, reinforced, whatever the word would be, by the fact that when the little fake audience pops up on screen and they hand him the award, if you look at like Dorian on the side, he starts like fixing his hair and like, you know, like pulling on his shirt and stuff and wiping his brow as if he's like, you know, all of a sudden he's nervous to be in front of this audience. And then and then they kind of like shake it off, and they're just like pointing their guns and like, whoa, what is this? Who is this guy? Who is this clown? And that was just, it's an attention to detail that I found, is really interesting. When you watch this movie multiple times over again, you start to notice these little things that they add in or that they include, or the director, Chuck Russell, that he saw, and he has the vision for that minute detail that adds this, it layers on, and it's really amazing. It's a testament to a really good film. It got great reviews too, so we'll get to that in a second. So we push on in the movie. Now, from this point in the film, that it's not based on the source material at all at this point in the screenplay. They do reference some of the costumes and the things that the mask does come from the source material, but at this point, the rest of the aftermath of the robbery is purely just for the screenplay. Stanley is betrayed by the newspaper reporter Peggy, that was played by Amy Yesbeck, and she turns him over to the mob because as I think she said it, that Ask Amy pays dick, and she was just looking for a quick paycheck, which she feels bad about when they are gonna like intending to hurt him, and she's all like, oh, I thought you weren't gonna hurt him. And then funnily enough, a little side tangent here again, we're a big fan of tangents here at the Nerd Review. In the animated series, in the very first episode of the animated series that would follow in 1995, the animated series follows the story of Stanley Ipkiss from the end of the movie. And if we can jump forward a bit, his pal that she was one of the only people that knows about the mask, and that Stanley still has it, is Peggy. And she very quickly in the very first few minutes of the episode, the very first episode of the series, she brushes off and she's like, well, I'm sorry about that whole time that I sold you out to the mob, and well, we can get over it. It was a one-time thing, and I apologize. It was just like, she brushes it off like it's no big deal that she betrayed him and set him up, and was basically going to leave him for dead, basically. That's just no big deal. In the comic, in the animated series, they made very light of it, and again, that comes back to what I was saying before. Like, they made an animated series out of this that was just entirely for children. Again, it's watered down, but it's very funny that you start with the source material, which is The Mask from Dark Horse Comics, and it's known for violence and dark humor, and a lot of the times they're shooting at Big Head, and he has a giant gaping hole in the middle of his chest, and he turns around and he shoots back at the bad guy. I mean, a lot of them are gangbangers and bad guys on the streets and stuff, but sometimes they're just bystanders, or in the case of Stanley Ipkiss' character in the comic book, he created a hit list of teachers who wronged him, people that owed him $40, and he drove over them with his car or something, and just sought out vengeance when he wore the mask. In Lieutenant Calloway's case, he became one of he was just going out for vengeance. He was going after drug dealers and criminals and anybody that he couldn't catch or take off the streets through his job as being a cop. At night, he would put on the mask, and it kind of doubled down and kind of demonstrated more about how it affected the mind. And in the first few issues, it was Kathy, that's as I mentioned, that was Stanley Ipkiss' girlfriend in the comic book, not Tina, the character that Cameron Diaz plays. It was Kathy that kind of explains to the lieutenant that it changed her boyfriend. He was always nice and very caring, and then when he got the mask, he became very vengeful and focused on it just changed a lot of the way he was, and he was so focused on retribution and getting back at people. And the lieutenant starts slowly going into more into a psychosis or insanity. He loses part of himself into the violence, and constantly being shot at and having to regenerate himself. This is what I think, having to heal himself over and over again, and having the big head persona in his mind. At one point, the cops are trying to stop him. He's murdering people and blowing things up all over the town. Edge City, there's the fictional city that the mask takes place in. Both the movie and the comic book are based in Edge Edge City, and it's when Lieutenant Calloway actually turns on his partner. In the comic book, his partner is Doyle. I'm getting all my names confused. In the comic book, his partner is Lionel. In the movie, his partner is Doyle. And the fumbling Doyle in the movie. In the comic book, he's not a fumbling detective. He's just a partner to Calloway. And Calloway almost kills him while wearing the mask. He's getting in my way. And they had a really, really cool style of writing for the mask. Like when you're wearing the mask, your bubble, like your word bubble, is all jagged lines and you have huge letters and stuff. And then when you're a normal person, it's like a normal word bubble. So they did this really, really cool style of like the mask is yelling and he's going to kill his partner. And then all of a sudden it's like a normal word bubble. And you inference that you can understand that now it's Calloway. And he's like, wait, what am I doing? Like he's a good guy. He's a good cop. I can't do this. And then the mask is like, no, he's just always in our way. We have to kill him. And then that's what finally makes Calloway realize that he can't wear the mask, and he buries it in cement. And that was the end of like what part of the original run. And then there's the final one, The Mask Returns, which I believe came out in 1995. And that is, like I was saying, to be honest, that is where I am. I haven't actually read all the way through on The Mask Returns, and then I have like the Joker, the Mask Joker and stuff. And there's a lot of content there. And then in 2020 they brought it back with a new series that I haven't read at all. There's some good content there, and I do plan on reading all of that great content, but it takes a very long time to get through all of that reading. So let's focus on the rest of this synopsis here. So the movie moves along pretty quickly, and like I said, it doesn't really follow the source material at this point anymore. Just kind of like the mannerisms of the mask and his costumes and some of the thing he does, like I said, the thing with the Tommy gun, and some of his dance moves, and how he pulls out all the guns and stuff like that. So in the movie, he falls in love with Tina, Cameron Diaz's character, and they have to defeat Dorian. And that leads to it leads to the Cuban Pete standoff with the police, the whole maracas and dance sequence, and he has all the cops dancing and stuff. And as a compare and contrast, I will let you know that in the comic, in the movie, he has all the police officers dancing in the street. This is very similar to the comic book, except when he jumps up on the car, instead of moving his arms and having them all dance, he pulls out automatic weapons and a flamethrower and just starts killing people. And this is one of the big distinctions between the comic book and the movie that they developed. And to me, it means that like I'm hoping and looking forward to when they decide to make the darker, more comic book accurate adaptation, and they just go balls to the wall and let the mask start killing people. Which we all know that everybody likes an R-rated movie with your favorite anti-hero, and that's pretty much where The Mask falls in line. Somebody actually, when I was talking to them, one of my colleagues at work, when I was talking to them about The Mask and this upcoming episode, they made a reference. They said that The Mask is kind of like Venom, kind of like a symbiote, and I didn't actually make that connection, and I was like, it's kind of true, the way that especially the way that he's Venom is being portrayed now, that he's like an entity that lives with you and kind of takes a toll on the host, very much the same way that The Mask works in the comic book. And they kind of allude to that a little bit in the movie. And I'm not sure, honestly, I'm not sure if they allude to that in the animated series. I have only gotten around to rewatching the very first episode, which is a funny, nostalgic thing to watch. But it's hard to sit down and watch all two seasons or 50-something episodes of an animated kid series from the 90s. The nostalgic factor has to be cranked up to 110, or it has to be one of the actual decent ones that was done in a way that wasn't just pandering to children and had like nonsensical storylines. So your Transformers or your 2003 TMNT series that had like actual stories that you could follow, and they're both fun for kids, and an adult or a teenager or anybody who was interested could arguably follow the show and enjoy it and not just want to blow their brains out after half an hour. So the movie wraps up, and the movie wraps up with the big final showdown. Dorian gets the mask, and I love the scene where Dorian gets the mask when he puts it on, and there's the big dark cloud that rises above his head. As soon as he catches the mask, you see this dark storm cloud with like purple lightning, and it swirls around him and engulfs him, and he puts the mask on, and he's this hulking, roided, thick neck veins version of Dorian. And with the explanation that was provided in the movie, and with understanding that it enhances your deepest desires, this makes sense. All Dorian wants is power, and he's corrupted, he's an evil person, he's a bad person, and this dark cloud engulfs him and circles him, and he has like a snake tongue, and they give him the red eyes, which is in the comic book. I mentioned when Lieutenant Calloway almost goes off the deep end, when Big Head gets like pushed to the brink, his eyes would actually go red. That's something that doesn't happen with Stanley Ipkiss, but they do a good job representing that in Dorian's version when he's wearing the mask. And that entire ending part is amazing. I want to give a shout out to Milo, the dog that played Milo. That is some great dog acting. He did a great job throughout the entire movie. He's doing head tilts, and he's grabbing the cheese off that policeman's desk when he's trying to help Stanley escape from jail so that he can go and help Tina and stop Dorian and all of that. And so it was just that dog did some amazing dog acting, and may he rest in peace, because if this movie is coming up on 30 years old, it's kind of just an unfortunate fact that dog is no longer with us. But he did an amazing job on the mask, and that's a great dog acting. To go with such amazing actors, the dog really stood up against Jim Carrey and Cameron Diaz, and Dorian, he's played by Peter Green. They're some amazing actors, and it's they did such an amazing job, especially in 1994, and at the time when special effects and this type of acting against nothing, or the idea that they're just telling you what it's going to look like afterward, once they've layered it, once they've put the once Industrial Light and Magic has had their moment and done their done their magic, what it's going to look like, and from what I've heard time and time again, while doing all my research and watching these interviews from various actors, especially at the time when this was so new, that the hardest thing they had done up until this point was trying to act with the idea of there's nothing there. One of the biggest parts of acting is reacting, and this is acting and reacting to nothing at times. There's just a prop or something as a representation, and the director or the special effects artist are just telling you there's going to be a monster here, so be scared, or you have to look here at a certain time, and you have to try to track from one place to the other where this CGI VFX character is going to be added in. And especially on the side of Jim Carrey and all these, even Cameron Diaz having no experience before this. She was doing modeling before this. This is her first acting credit, and Jim Carrey before this did Ace Ventura. So they don't have this, they haven't been doing, sci-fi fantasy movies of, that are so popular these days. And this, layering effect and adding CGI to a movie is so new, and to have no experience to fall back on and to give such amazing performances is really remarkable, and it's something to commend. And it really lends itself to a movie that has, become a classic and that people still watch almost 30 years later. And the VFX and the acting and everything holds up so well, and that's just something that goes a long way to say that these young actors were obviously so talented. If you look back, clearly, at the time they were new. Jim Carrey has Ace Ventura, he's doing The Mask, then he goes on to Dumb and Dumber, and he goes right on to Batman to do the Riddler right after that, and just like explodes onto the scene. And same for Cameron Diaz. So like I said at the top of the episode, this movie was just brimming with potential and talent. It was it's remarkable how much talent was was involved in one movie, and that extends to Milo as well, the dog. That was my little, you gotta represent and give credit to all those Hollywood acting dogs and cats and all the birds and animals that are trained, and hopefully they, we hope they have really good lives. And I hope that Milo went, to the doggy heaven with a belly full of, dog treats and bacon, and just had a really good life after, that amazing performance that he gave during The Mask. And so I'll wrap up on this tangent. So the movie had a budget of $18 million and was a smashing box office success, making $351 million. And I'll give you a little bit of perspective. The Son of the Mask, which would be made in 2005, had a much bigger, much more inflated budget of $84 million, and was a huge box office flop, and only made $59 million. So they lost like 20 something, a good like $25 million on the sequel, unfortunately, which I'll be honest, I haven't seen Son of the Mask yet. I've watched a few reviews and I've read about it, and I mean, the first Mask from 1994, it has an 80% review on Rotten Tomatoes. It's certified fresh, and Son of the Mask has a 6% review. So I mean, I'm just going off of popular consensus when I say it is not a good movie. But that's other people's opinions. I'll be honest, that is other people's opinions going from popular consensus. So I will sit down and watch the movie. I know that my girlfriend actually really does enjoy The Son of the Mask. She's not shy about the fact that it's not a good movie, but she does enjoy the movie. So she recommends that I still sit down and watch it, and that we'll have a good time watching that movie. And I've mentioned it a few times in various other episodes of the podcast, and I'll mention it again, just because the review or the consensus of a movie is super low, 6%, doesn't mean that it's an unwatchable or that you shouldn't watch the movie. It just means that a lot of people didn't like it, or maybe they were comparing it to the original, and they didn't like the new actor, or there was something about it that didn't mesh well, or it affected the memory that they had of the original, and that's valid. That's their opinion. But if you're not watching a few bad movies throughout the year, then how are you properly judging the good ones? That's how I always frame it. The bad, you watch some bad movies, and that puts it into perspective that, like, well, this movie is really good compared to this really bad movie that I watched. And as I've said in various episodes, various monologues and tangents about favorites and opinions, that it's all so personal. So like I will sit down, and I think it's important to sit down and watch a movie before you jump on a bandwagon of it's a bad movie. Like everybody else said, it has a 6% rating, right? So it's obviously a bad movie. I don't think that's fair. I don't think that it gives yourself enough credit. It doesn't give the movie enough credit. If we take a step back from reviews and critics and all these people who are paid to criticize something, that people still sat down to make that movie. I think that should be taken into consideration, that the writers sat down and they wrote something, and the producers, they worked on it. The director, he put in effort and time, and they all came together in an effort to create something that would entertain and be enjoyable. And just because it's not considered not just because it's not considered like a great piece of art, cinema, that it's influential, that it didn't make a lot of money, that it lost $25 million, doesn't mean that it doesn't have a heart at its core, that people didn't put in effort towards creating something. And I think that anything that's been created deserves enough time. It deserves time to actually properly observe it and actually judge for yourself whether or not you like the movie. And I mean, it could be a handful of laughs, jokes, it could be the costume design, the props, the score, the music, anything of the myriad of elements that goes into creating a movie, the special effects, the directing, the cinematography, the photos, the photography, the setting, the world building, the expansion of the world, of the mask. Any of these elements can be appreciated on their own or as a whole, and that could lend itself towards maybe you review the movie a bit higher. It's easy to get lost in the void. You're influenced by other people. Everybody didn't like this movie, so I'm not going to like this movie either. And if you don't give it a chance, you're selling it short. You're selling it yourself short. And I think that it's about individualism too. At some point, you have to really watch the movie and give it a fair shake in that sense. And I think everybody should do that. I think if you just jump on a bandwagon, you're just not being fair, to be honest. At the end of the day, you're not fair to yourself, and you're not fair to the art that's being created. And in the case of movies, it is a form of art. It's one of the best forms of art that we create, and it deserves to be at least absorbed, and take it in, give it some time, give it the time of day, and then come to your own opinion, come to your own conclusion. And if you really didn't like the movie, then rate it honestly, because at the end of the day, you're just lying to yourself, and that'll be the end of this random tidbit of monologue. So just respect yourself enough to develop your own opinions, and then respect other people who have also come to potentially a different opinion. And if you do that, I think that we can have good debates and conversations about what we like and what we dislike, and still respect each other, and not have arguments all the time and just yell at each other that my movie is better than your movie, and if you don't like this movie, then you have bad tastes, or you're a bad human being, or something ridiculous of that nature, which happens often too much these days, and especially when it comes to people's opinions about movies and such amazing entertainment. And just because it's not what you wanted or what you expected doesn't mean that you should just shit all over it all day. So let's just digress and jump back into the movie, because this episode has had way too many tangents. The goofs that I actually witnessed in the movie, that I actually saw, not one of the ones that I read from the IMDb page, because there's a whole page of goofs, things that they messed up on in the movie, and there's the whole trivia page. But one of the goofs that I actually noticed myself was after Stanley is given to the cops, after Dorian captures him and decides that they'll never think of that Dorian has the mask now if they think that Stanley Ipkiss has been caught out. So they give him this like, crappy little rubber mask, and they drop him off at the police headquarters, and he's locked up. And so Tina comes to see him, and she warns him that like Dorian's planning something terrible tonight at the Coco Bongo, and she's just going to get out of town because he's gone crazy. And so she leaves, and she's confronted by the henchmen of varying baldness and ponytails. So she does a pretty good job of defending herself. The guy walks up in front of her, and she realizes she's being boxed in, and she delivers a pretty good right hook to the guy's face, and she punches him pretty hard in the face, and she scratches him. Big old scratch right across the face, and a little bit of blood on his cheek. And the chase pursues, right? The chase pursues. The chase ensues. She's running, screaming through the alleyway, and so at the end of the chase, right, she's cut off by Dorian, and the guy, the ponytail henchman, sorry, it's not the ponytail henchman, it's the long hair straggly henchman that she punched in the face. He comes back out and cuts her off, but he has no blood. There's no scratch on his cheek, and I noticed that. I was like, "Hey, where'd the scratch go?" He healed in the 2 minutes chase that occurred. The scratch on this guy's face healed. I found that was pretty funny. Something else that I took note of, something that I take note of in movies, is how much screen time passes once a timer is activated. So they click the self-destruct button, and the timer goes off, and they're like T minus 10 minutes. And I'm always super curious if like 10 minutes passes, because I grew up watching Dragon Ball Z, and I loved Dragon Ball Z. I watched the original version, so not the shortened version where they took out all the filler. I watched all those filler episodes, and he would say, I need 5 minutes, and that 5 minutes would span 6 or 7 episodes, and it would be like 4 hours later, and it would be like, oh well, he still needs more time. I'm always curious at how accurate they are. And so in this movie, I went a little hardcore here. So the bomb countdown, Dorian is like, this party ends in 10 minutes, because he has the mask on, big lizard tongue, the red eyes, the whole shebang. And if you look at the time code, it's 1 hour, 24 minutes, 22 seconds, and the bomb is armed. And so the rest of the scene unfolds, and Cameron Diaz, Tina, convinces him to take off the mask. She wants one last kiss, and she gets her foot loose, and she kicks the mask across the room. And then there's the whole Milo with the mask portion, because he finally puts the mask on. And one of the things I noticed about Milo, he's got some huge danglers. I didn't notice that. Good for Milo. He probably has a long lineage of acting dogs. Maybe it was one of his children that starred in Son of the Mask. That would be interesting. I'm gonna have to look that up. I'll make a tweet about that later on. So the whole Milo thing happens. He manages to take out a few of the henchmen, the long straggly haired henchmen, the bald one with the freaking tail on the back of his head. Milo takes out both of those. Stanley gets the mask back, and he gets shot at. He manages to take them all out. He pulls out all the big guns, and he has the whole, well, you gotta ask yourself, are you feeling lucky? And they all run away. So he runs over. Tina's like, Stanley, the bomb. And they go over, and there's only like 10 seconds left, something like that. And he picks up the bomb, and he swallows it. And the bomb explodes. His stomach goes out. And as the bomb explodes, and the time code is 1 hour, 30 minutes, 15 seconds. Less than 10 minutes. They get an A+ on their timer. All that happened, and it was, arguably as plausible. They had less than 10 minutes. It was like 5 minutes or something of screen time. Less than even 6 minutes of screen time from when he clicks the bomb and when it actually explodes in his stomach. So I give them an A+. There's movies like I said, Dragon Ball Z. I've watched other movies where, it's T minus 10 minutes, and they're fighting, and they're running, and and they're punching each other and they're having exposition and they're like, you gotta go, we're gonna die here, and it's like, this is not the time to have that conversation. You clicked a timer that had 10 minutes and it's been like 14 minutes already. Like, this place is gonna blow up. And so I've always been very curious about how well is it even on the director's mind that he's put a timer on, and like, are people aware of that? I feel like there's been movies and I'll have to pause or do some research about movies that have done exactly the amount of time that their timer has given them, and that the director actively followed that timeline. That'd be interesting. I'll have to look that up. So let me look that up just a second. And as it turns out, that statistic is not highly tracked. I did not find very much while Googling, though I suspect it would probably be a movie like Inception or something filmed by Christopher Nolan, because, they have, he's one of the directors that has an eye for that kind of thing. He's looking at the details of his movies. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case in having a movie that has a countdown that is accurate to the screen time. It's probably like a Stanley Kubrick or something like that. It would be in like Space Odyssey or The Shining, or like I said, Inception or The Dark Knight. I think I saw online somewhere somebody said The Dark Knight, some of the countdowns in that had very, they were very timed out, very accurate. So that's interesting. And just that was something that something that I take note of. Maybe you'll take note in the next time you watch a movie that has a countdown. Just jot it down, see if the timer on that screen actually plays out to the screen time of the movie. And it's just something to think about. You laugh at, like, oh, they portray these scenes and it's so cutting. It's so they have such little amounts of time and they're supposed to make all these decisions, but they're portraying it where it's like it has like 20-30 minutes and that timer's still just beeping by steadily. It's just something that I think about, one of those random little thoughts as on the nerd head. So let's get back to The Mask. We're coming to the end of this episode. So the movie wraps up. It's quite a good wrap up. There's so much going on in that final scene between Dorian wearing the mask. He gets the mask kicked out of his hand, and then all of a sudden Milo's wearing the mask. He's biting people. He pees on one of the henchmen. He bites the other guy by the butt. Rips off his trousers. Stanley gets the mask back. He, saves everybody, and, everything happened in public, so he's exonerated. It's even the mayor shows up, and, he vouches for, Ipkiss. He's like, no, I saw Dorian Tyrell put on that mask. This man just saved us all. And so he's exonerated, and, he throws the mask into the ocean, or basically off the same bridge at the edge of Edge City. That's funny. And you see his friend Charlie jump into the river, and Milo goes and grabs it before him, and he's standing on the walkway with Tina, and they share their kiss. And he goes smoking the way he does, the way that he did when he had the mask. And what's funny is that the story is continued, as I mentioned, in the animated series, and the animated series picks up. It is the story of Stanley Ipkiss, but the Jim Carrey portrayal. So it's that story, the story from the movie, that is continued into the animated series. And in the animated series, we do get to find out that, I guess, Milo kept the mask, he brought it back, and now Stanley has it. And in the first scene, he's like trying to keep himself from using it, and he's like, no, only use the mask to do good. And then he hears, like, again, somebody's robbing the bank that he works at, and he's like, oh, gotta go save save the day, and he puts the mask on, and there's music, and he has the same in the animated series. He has the same yellow suit, and it's the same visuals that we got in the movie, not the stuff that was from the comic book. So like I said, it would be really cool. We're in 2022 now. It's been so long since we've had any sort of adaptation from The Mask, and there was a more recent adaptation, a more recent comic book run that I believe started in 2021. I have to double check that one, and it had, it's from what I've seen, it has really good reviews, that most recent comic book run. So it'd be cool to see, Netflix or one of the streaming entities that are around right now pick up The Mask and return to this franchise and see what we got. Maybe Jim Carrey would come back. Supposedly he's retiring from acting after Sonic 2, which would, if he is retiring, then, I wish him well. He's been an amazing actor all my life. He's been some of the best. He's done some of the best roles that I've seen growing up. And if he's still going to come back, then maybe he'll do a sequel to The Mask or have a cameo in some future entity that is The Mask. It's just like what I said in the Small Soldiers episode. If somebody's listening, let's go back to The Mask. Let's make that happen. Let's do a Mask sequel series, but let's do it. Let's pump up the rating. Let's go, rated R. There's no FCC on the streaming platforms. We don't have to pander to children or water it down. The source material is dark. It's funny. It's amazing. It's what inspired so many people to do the movies in the first place. So, there's something there that people liked. So let's go back to that. And let's hope for the future that we get some more Mask content. That is what I would love to see. And I hope people love to see more episodes of the Nerd Review. So that's where I'm going to wrap it up. Like I said, let's hope for new content of The Mask. And I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you hope for new episodes of the Nerd Review. And I hope you come back next week and the week after that, because I'm going to be here making more episodes. So until then, this has been the Nerd. This has been the Nerd Review of The Mask. And this is the Nerd signing off.